Income tax 2020 recovery rebate credit. Come in, relax with income tax 2020. Recovery rebate credit. When thinking about the income tax formula, we're going to be on the bottom part of the formula where we have the credits and the payments. Remembering that we can basically break our formula into two halves, the top half then being basically a modified income statement, the bottom half then being the payments and the credits applied out in order to then get to the bottom line of the tax refund or the amount due. We're going to be focusing down here in the credits section, remembering that we're going to be comparing and contrasting the credits to the deductions, both being good, but if you had $1 of credit and $1 of the deduction, the credit would be worth more because in essence you'd get that entire dollar's worth of benefit, whereas if you had a deduction, such as an above-the-line deduction or below-the-line deduction, you would only get a benefit in relation to the amount of the tax rate. We're going to be discussing the recovery rebate credit, which will be on the second page of the 1040. So second page of the 1040, we're concentrating in on line 30. Now, this is something that you have not seen in prior years because it's tied to the economic impact payment. So you might hear about it this year and you're going to say, oh, that's a new thing that's going to be going on. It is, because it's kind of related to the economic impact payment. Now, from a practical standpoint, for most people, you probably won't have anything that's going to be input here unless there was a problem generally with the economic impact payment. So that's generally what you want to have in mind when you're thinking about this item. If someone says, hey, I didn't get an economic impact payment and I should have, then you're thinking possibly you have the recovery rebate credit might be in play. So this thing is tied and linked together with the economic impact payment. For most people, hopefully the economic impact payments went out cleanly and everybody got, the correct payment, or most people got the correct payment, but we won't really know for sure until we actually file the tax returns. And if you have any kind of problems with it, this is where the code or the IRS or the government plan to kind of reconcile any of those problems with the distribution of the economic impact payment. So we have the recovery rebate credit then. The recovery rebate credit is authorized by the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, C-A-R-E-S Act. Any eligible individual who did not receive the full amount of the recovery rebate as an advance payment, also known as an economic impact payment, can claim the recovery rebate credit on a 2020 Form 1040 or Form 1040 SR. So let me kind of recap this economic impact payment concept, how it was rolled out, and how it kind of ties into this recovery rebate credit. So you can kind of think about the economic impact payment that went out in 2020, which was to support, the problems that are going on, help people out during the coronavirus and the closures and all that kind of stuff. You can kind of think about that credit as basically being tied to the 2020 taxes, even though those hadn't been filed and won't be filed until we file them in 2021. But they basically issued the payments based on prior year information, meaning if they had 2019, they used 2019. If they had 2018, they used 2018 to calculate what the credit was and then send out the credit. And then they had the idea that basically they will reconcile any differences when we file the return for 2020 in 2021 by linking the economic impact payment to the recovery rebate credit. So that's kind of what we're thinking. Now, for most people, it should have gone out fairly cleanly because it's based on very basic kind of formula, meaning everybody who has a social security number or a tax identification number, in essence, generally basically got a set amount, the $1,200. However, there are circumstances where someone might not have got the $1,200 because the IRS didn't know about it or they didn't file the prior tax return. And there's issues with basically qualifying children, because qualifying children added another $500 to it as well. So if they didn't know about the qualifying child, then they wouldn't pick that up as well. So if we had a situation, for example, where the 2019 or 2018 return did not have a qualifying child on it, but then now we're calculating it now and we should have a qualifying child on it, then you could have some kind of difference for a $500 difference. Or if for whatever reason the economic impact payment didn't go out at all, then you would think that we could reconcile that basically at this point in time. Now, some problems may have happened because people didn't file 2019 or 2018 tax returns. If they did not file and they were required to file, then the IRS would like them to file that. And if they haven't filed their prior year tax returns and we're doing tax preparation, it would be great for us to do the prior year tax returns as well as we file it. And then also some people may not have filed the tax returns because they're not required to file the tax returns. And that might lead to more people filing in the 2020 year, in 2021 for the 2020 tax year, because they might be trying to get, the economic impact payment or the recovery rebate credit, but that possibly they did not get because they don't normally file a tax return and they never got the credit. Now, the IRS tried to pick those people up as well. Those would typically be people that are under the threshold, under an income level threshold, that wouldn't qualify or don't need to file a tax return. But even then, if they had Social Security payments or some other government payments, the IRS still tried to issue the check even though they didn't have the tax return. So if they didn't have any Social Security payments and whatnot, and they don't file the tax return, then it's possible they didn't get the economic impact payment. And then you may have more people that are under the level that need to file a tax return filing this year due to the fact that they want to pick up the recovery rebate credit that they didn't get in the format of an economic impact payment. So the other kind of weird situation that comes up is people that were possibly students, for example, they would not be a qualifying child. So if they were a student and they in 2018 or 2019, they were claimed as a dependent by their parent, then the parent didn't get the $500 extra money, and the student didn't get it because they were claimed as a dependent. So those are like the one group that didn't really get it. If they're not a qualifying child and you're a dependent, then you may not have gotten the credit. Now, those people may have become independent in the following year and possibly then qualify for the credit. So in that kind of situation, you might have a situation where they didn't get it because they were a dependent in the year that the IRS used to calculate the economic impact payment. But now all of a sudden, they're not a dependent anymore, and they get to qualify possibly for the payment of the $1,200. So those are kind of the scenarios that would be outside the box. But again, most people probably got the full payment, but we'll see during the tax season. So generally, this credit will increase the amount of your tax refund or lower the amount of the tax you owe. You do not need to complete any information about the recovery rebate credit on your 2020 Form 1040 or 1040 SR if your economic impact payment in 2020 was $1,200 or $2,400 if married filing jointly. So basically, everybody should have got pretty much, everyone with a social security number or an identification number should have gotten $1,200. If married, then the two individuals, obviously you can think of them both getting $1,200 or as a joint return getting the $2,400. Plus, this is where the confusion sometimes lies, $500 for each qualifying child you had in 2020. Now, the qualifying child had to be under basically 17, and you could have issues of, someone wasn't a qualifying child before, or we had a new qualifying child, and so that's where some of the issues come in. You received all your recovery rebate in 2020. So if your payments were okay, if your economic impact payments were correct in 2020, then like most people should, then you should be okay. If not, that's when you have your credit here. So CARES Act and economic impact payment. So under the CARES Act, millions of Americans have received economic impact payments. The IRS will continue to make these payments through December 2020. For more information on economic impact payments, you could see questions and answers in the Economic Impact Payment Information Center. So you can look that up on the IRS website if you so choose. In general, the economic impact payment is not taxable to you for federal income tax purposes, but it will reduce your recovery rebate credit that you can claim on your 2020 Form 1040 or 1040 SR. So in other words, the economic impact payment that you're receiving is kind of like income, right? You got money, but now this is going to be an exception to the income because they're explicitly saying you're not going to have to include it in income. So it's not like they're going to give you a 1099 that you got to include it in income. However, obviously, you're not going to get a credit that's tied to the economic impact payment. If you got the economic impact payment, you're only going to be able to get the credit if you didn't get the full amount of the economic impact payment or any of it. So Get My Payment, this is a tool on the IRS website. You can check the status of your payment by using the Get My Payment application. Visit our Get Payment Frequently Asked Questions page for more information about the status of your payment, including an explanation of the status you received from the application. So you can go to the IRS website and look up, you can search in it, Get My Payment, and use that tool to track And IRS website is at irs.gov, irs.gov. How do I find the payment amount I received in 2020? So we should have notice 1444. So we can refer to your notice 1444 for the payment amount you were issued before any offsets in 2020. You'll need this information to determine the amount to include on the worksheet that will be included in the 2020 instructions for Form 1040 and 1040 SR when completing the Form 1040 or Form 1040 SR. So you should get a notice 1444. You want to advise clients and do yourself to hold on to that so that you can use it for tax preparation or provide it to a tax preparer. Who qualifies for the recovery rebate credit? The recovery rebate credit is figured like the 2020 economic impact payment, except that the credit eligibility and the credit amount are based on the tax year 2020 information shown on the 2020 tax return filed in 2020. So remember, the credit now, we're looking at 2020 information to look at the qualifications. When they issued the economic impact payment, they looked at 2019 if they had it, 2018 if they didn't, and if they didn't have either of those, they still might have issued the payment based on some other information, such as federal payments that are going out in some other way. So you can think of that kind of like an estimate. Basically, they estimated what the payment should be, even though they wanted to be based on 2020, and then planned on reconciling any differences while the tax return is filed in 2020. However, due to the fact that it's fairly basic, for the most part, there hopefully shouldn't be too many adjustments, but those adjustments now can be fixed with the recovery rebate credit. Generally, you are eligible to claim the recovery rebate credit if you were a U.S. citizen or U.S. resident alien in 2020, are not a dependent of another taxpayer for tax year 2020, and have a Social Security number valid for employment that is issued before the due date of your 2020 tax return, including extensions. You can take the recovery rebate credit for any recovery rebate amount that is more than the economic impact payment you received in 2020 by completing line 30 on your 2020 Form 1040 or 1040 SR. You do not need to complete information about the recovery rebate credit on your 2020 Form 1040 or 1040 SR if either of the following apply. You received $1,200 plus $500 for each qualifying child you had in 2020, or you're filing a joint return for 2020 together. You and your spouse received $2,400 plus $500 for each qualifying child and you had in 2020. So in other words, if we got it right, if we, the IRS, sent you the correct amount, which would be $1,200 basically per Social Security number, plus $500 for any qualifying child, a dependent basically under 17, a qualifying child is the main general rules there, then you don't have to do anything because we got it right. If we got it wrong, then you might have to fill out the recovery rebate credit to fix it. So you may be able to claim the recovery rebate credit if you are eligible but were not issued an economic impact payment. So if you were eligible for an economic impact payment, like you have a pulse and you have a Social Security number, and you're a citizen, then you can and you didn't get it, then you might be able to claim the economic impact payment. Again, most people probably got it because they based it on the prior tax return, the prior year's tax returns for 2 years. So if you filed within the last 2 years, then you basically should have got it. Note, however, there could be an income limitation phase out, which we'll talk about shortly, that could complicate matters a bit, because obviously if the income limitation phase out was based on the prior year, then you might have gotten something under the full 1,200, and then in the current year, your income levels may have changed, and that could have an impact on the amount of the economic impact payment. Your economic impact payment was less than 1,200 or 2,400 married filing jointly return plus 500 for each qualifying child you had in 2020. So it should be fairly basic if they sent it out. It probably was correct, and for the 1,200 or 2,400. Where a lot of the issues might have taken place is the $500 for the qualifying child could have been an issue, or and again, those cases where you might have been a dependent, a situation where someone was a dependent in the prior year, but they're miraculously no longer a dependent anymore. They're independent now, and they get to qualify, and then maybe they qualify for the credit for 2020, and that could be like students, that maybe they were a dependent and now they're not. So Form 1040 and 1040 SR Instructions Recovery Rebate Credit Worksheet. If eligible, you can claim the Recovery Rebate Credit in 2020 Form 1040 or 1040 SR. The 2020 instructions for Form 1040 and Form 1040 SR will include a worksheet you can use to figure the amount of any credit for which you are eligible. As was the case with the advance payment of the credit called the Economic Impact Payment, your Recovery Rebate Credit is up to $2,400 if you file a joint tax return, or up to $1,200 for all other eligible individuals. Those with qualifying children will receive up to an additional $500 per qualifying child. Your recovery rebate amount will be phased out if your adjusted gross income for 2020 exceeds $150,000 if you are married filing joint, or $112,500 if you are using the head of household filing status, or $75,000 if you are using any other filing status. So you do have these phase-out limitations on it, which does kind of complicate the situation, and those could lead to more kind of adjustments to the economic impact payment due to the fact that the phase-out, if applied, might have been based on incorrect numbers or in the prior year tax returns, which could be substantially different in 2020. Because the economic impact payment you receive in 2020 was in advance of the recovery rebate, the worksheet provides you a recovery rebate credit to the extent your recovery rebate amount is more than your economic impact payment.